Welcome, welcome. This is episode 4 of the Radical Healing and Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Argaris. I'm a psychotherapist that specializes in obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety disorders. And I'm also a fellow traveler, meaning I have OCD, but my years of recovery have rendered me subclinical, meaning I no longer meet the criteria for diagnosis. However, my brain is still very much OCD. Today's topic is going to be about acceptance and the importance that it has on the OCD recovery journey. I recently noticed that I was using my skills of acceptance and surrender on my own OCD recovery journey when I recently went on vacation. Um, First of all, it's going to sound trite, but it's difficult for me to take days off from work. I feel a sense of like a lack of control, um, and a lot of feelings come up for me about that. But nevertheless, it's a necessary part of taking care of yourself sometimes. And I did document some of the moments that I had where I was dealing with OCD um, coming up, right? And me just becoming an observer of that it wants to protect me, it feels that discomfort. And then it's an attempt to get us to rely on the emergency system when we're not in an emergency, right? So that's the catastrophic thinking element of the disorder, right? So, for example, who likes being on an airplane? I don't know anybody that does. But, for me, I've only been on an airplane for 3 different trips starting in 2024. When I first did, it was difficult for me. It was definitely was triggering. This third trip, though, I was able to practice a lot more acceptance and recognize, going back to core beliefs that we're trying to transition to, which is I don't know what people are thinking and I can't read minds. Nobody can. And I can't tell the future. Nobody can. So, in the same way, I don't know what's going to happen on the airplane on a Sunday. I don't know what's going to happen in my car on a Tuesday. What's different is, the sensations or the thoughts or the feelings that I might be experiencing with regard to that. But on any given day, nobody knows what's going to happen. Your OCD might decide to latch to that. So I did notice that with the recovery skills that I practiced on those other 2 trips that I took a couple years ago, um, it was a less triggering thing for me to do. If anything, like the most difficult thing that I felt going there was recording myself in public, and that felt uncomfortable. But I feel like that would be uncomfortable for a lot of people unless you do it many, many times. um, it's probably going to feel awkward to do that. Um, but I needed to practice acceptance of the sensations, thoughts, feelings, um, whatever was going to come up for me, because I knew that my OCD was going to sense that I was uncomfortable and try to take over and try to offer a way out. So I was just observing that, and I was, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and just letting whatever comes up and letting it pass. And it always does, right? So that's how. So what I was practicing acceptance of is, number one, I don't know the future. Number two, I can't control how I feel or whatever pops into my head. And like I don't know what's gonna happen. I didn't know what was gonna happen yesterday, last week. I don't know what's gonna happen next week. I didn't know at those times what was gonna happen, and I still don't know what is gonna happen. So my brain might try to project certain images or ideas about what might happen, but that doesn't make it any more real or any more likely to happen just because I was thinking that. So I was able to move through the discomfort, right? That's recovery in action. Is it fun? No. Was I still able to have good moments? Of course I was, right? It's very rarely all bad on the OCD recovery journey, right? But acceptance, right, in general, um, why is it an important part of the recovery journey? Well, the resistance is why we're suffering, right? People that are deep in chronic anxiety or OCD, have a lot of resistance to certain intrusive thoughts, images, urges, sensations, certain ideas or concepts or possibilities. We have a lot of resistance, which is where the compulsions come in and what grows the OCD and anxiety, right? So, all of the time that we're spending doing our compulsions, trying to figure it out, making thoughts go away or trying to make feelings go away, is resistance. And that is what is growing it, right? So if you've ever started off with a trigger before and you've been thinking about it for hours or days, and then every time you go back to that thought, you feel completely helpless. It feels so big. You feel completely powerless. That's because we've been making a deposit in that account again and again and again, and it's growing and growing and growing and growing. And so we're like, it feels almost insurmountable when you've really spent so much time, in a cycle, in a spiral, in an episode, whatever you want to call it. You can go back to that and be like, oh my gosh, this feels so huge. And really, part of why that feels so huge is because of the amount of attention that we've been giving to it. And that's why we use the response prevention. That's part of the recovery, right? Is like we're recognizing we're having this experience, but we're not engaging as much and we're learning. That's a skill. That's not something you turn off, right? That's something that we practice. I notice it. I know what I want to do. I know that I don't like it. It's going to exist here, and I'm going to focus on my goals and values while that exists, right? So practicing acceptance can look like, if there's a sort of levels, the top layer is accepting the thoughts, images, urges, and sensations, right? That's the basic form of acceptance, is like, I'm having this experience, I'm having these thoughts. I can't necessarily control that, right? I can control my response to it. We can't control our thoughts or our feelings always, right? I can control where I direct my focus, right? I can, direct my attention to a different thought or feeling or whatever. But if I'm having intrusive thoughts or feelings, which everybody does, right? Obviously in OCD, it's part of what makes it a disorder, right? But practicing acceptance that I cannot control that. I can't control whether I feel anxious or whether I have a disturbing thought or image, right? I can't control that part. What I can control is my response to it, right? That's a really difficult thing to accept. And remember, acceptance isn't an on and off switch. It's not like, I accept it now. I decided that right now. It's something that you work at and work on. It's a skill that you're developing. It's something that you know, we're spending time cultivating. It's not something that you just do like that, right? It's like learning something, right? Like, uh, we're not going to automatically just learn a skill necessarily. I guess it just depends on what that skill is. Um, but think about the long-standing pattern of ruminating and compulsions and safety behaviors, and you know all of the years or months or whatever, however long you've been suffering, all of the time and attention and the momentum that it has and the gravitational pull that has. Think about that. That's kind of a bigger project, right? So if we're going to practice recovery skills, that entire process is not going to just stop with automatic acceptance. That's not happening. Think about it like we are changing the way a system operates, and we're not doing that in a day or a week. It's going to take a while, not forever, right? And the cool part about it is that as you go along, it gets better, as it gets incrementally better, I would say, right? Everybody's recovery journey is different, but you start to experience the effects positively of the recovery journey as you go along, right? So it's like, that's why we say gradual, right? And so practicing acceptance, moving toward acceptance of like, I truly cannot, you know, change or pick how I'm feeling all the time. That's going to help you on your recovery journey. And I would say it's essential, right? Because we are practicing a belief that we can and have to, and that something terrible is going to happen if we don't attempt to change, control, stop a feeling or a thought. That is what we're practicing, but that doesn't align with reality, right? Who could blame us, right? Because when you're suffering that badly and when you're that activated, uh, you don't really care at that point what's rational. You just want to feel better, and I don't blame anybody for that. And I've been there myself, right? I've suffered as well. But kind of working on practicing acceptance that I really cannot make that change, right? And also, the distress tolerance is a version of acceptance, right? I am allowing these thoughts, images, urges, and sensations to exist without trying to stop them or solve them or figure it out, right? The distress tolerance is the body work, I always say, of practicing acceptance, because there's the part where we use the prefrontal cortex, what we know, our rational part of our mind, to not respond so much to the amygdala. That's the part, that's your fight or flight, where your emotions are, right? We're attempting to stop the alarm by doing the compulsions or safety behaviors. Those are the choices that we make, right? Which can feel very automatic sometimes. I understand with rumination, or especially like something like sensory motor OCD, that often really doesn't feel like a choice because it's happening so quickly and it feels so automatic, right? But we indeed can learn response prevention strategies with that as well, right? But the distress tolerance is another form of the acceptance, where I am allowing myself, and I'm building, just like we're building muscle, right? I'm building the skill of distress tolerance, of like, I am practicing handling this big trigger. Maybe I'm starting with small ones, right? That's a version of acceptance. I'm allowing this to happen in my body, and I'm practicing building the skill to experience this and know that it's okay that I'm experiencing it, and getting the confidence that the feeling or the sensation is going to go down on its own. That's something to be practiced, right? Deeper level acceptance comes with the work that we do with disputing irrational beliefs, where we're not just doing the sort of maybe, maybe not, which I feel like is also, it's helpful, but it's not the whole deal, especially if you have chronic pure OCD type OCD, right? Sometimes we need that deeper level of acceptance, which the disputing irrational belief exercise, the downward arrow technique, practicing the unconditional acceptance, right, of what we do not have control over, but also recognizing our strengths, skills, abilities, resources. That's what OCD erases, right? When we do the downward arrow technique, meaning we find what you're afraid of and then we keep investigating that, right? So, okay, if that happened, then what would happen? If that happened, then what? If that happened, then what? We get to the core fear, which is usually pretty huge, right? We learn that the OCD or the anxiety behavior is an indirect attempt to prevent the core fear, which is, again, like I said, usually a pretty scary thing, right? So we use that to identify what core fears are. And then in our disputing exercise, we recognize that we don't have control over everything. And that's just not changing, right? Like that's true for everybody. But we do have strengths, skills, abilities, and resources. And the OCD erases those, right? It completely forgets all about it because it's an emergency state. It's in an emergency state, right? So when we dispute, we are recognizing that we do indeed have skills, strengths, abilities, and resources, right? To deal with different problems. We're also recognizing that we don't know what problems are going to happen in our disputing exercise, right? We are highlighting what we're in control over and what we're not in control over. And we are kind of breaking down the black and white thinking, and we're moving more toward gray area, rational, reasonable, and realistic thinking, right? And so, can we change our beliefs like that? Nothing happens like that, right? That's what a compulsion promise is, right? Do this and it's fine, right? That's what the compulsions promise. That doesn't work, right? But recovery work is more like taking the small steps, making it a practice. You know, it's boring, like, but it's recovery. Like, that's what we want, right? We want to feel better, in a recovery sense, not in a compulsory sense, right? Nothing happens instantly the way that OCD wants you to believe. Something bad is going to happen instantly. You're going to be helpless instantly. You're going to lose everything instantly. You're going to feel better instantly. All you have to do is this. Things don't happen like that usually, right? But that sense of urgency comes from being stuck in the emergency system, right? Act now, act quickly. Something terrible is going to happen. Use, whatever means necessary. In this case, it's rituals, it's compulsions, it's safety behaviors, right? Do whatever, avert the disaster, right? This will work, and it doesn't. So all it does is grow the system and grow the OCD and create more momentum with it, which is all recoverable, right? So deeper level of acceptance looks like accepting what we're in control over and what we're not in control over, right? And recognizing that we do have strengths, skills, abilities, and resources, and those are also buildable. Strengths, skills, abilities, and resources are buildable, right? So often those of us that have OCD and anxiety are prone to feeling helpless and stuck, right? When you can identify your strengths, skills, abilities, and resources and make it part of your practice to recognize that in a non-compulsory way, then that's going to address the sense of helplessness, right? The sense of feeling stuck. When we can move from feeling helpless and stuck to, okay, like, I can't do everything or know everything or control everything, but like, I'm also not completely helpless or stuck, that's huge, right? And that can make a big difference, feelings wise, because imagine going from feeling completely helpless and stuck to like, okay, like, I'm not helpless. Like, that is, that's a huge jump, right? And then, of course, as we continue to go along on the recovery journey, we want to just go ahead and move toward confidence, right? Where our attention and our focus it's geared toward our goals and values. We're trucking along, triggers are happening, but we recognize what the triggers are, right? We accept what it means to have OCD. And we're dealing with it differently. Every time we're using those skills, we're weakening the momentum of the OCD system, and we're creating a new system that's going in a different direction that goes toward, okay, I have strengths and abilities. Okay, actually, I don't know that. Okay, well, I thought that and felt that. That doesn't mean it's more likely or more real, right? Living that, and that becomes more automatic over time. So that's really what I mean by acceptance. And there are sometimes things happen in life now where, automatically my brain does rely on, if it could go to an extreme, and my brain can really think it knows what that person meant. It know like my brain is going to make those assumptions, and because I have an OCD brain, my OCD is going to be like, oh, what's going on, there's a threat, oh, then it's really urgent, it's really catastrophic. My brain will do that, and I witness it, right? And so, I have to let the wave pass sometimes before I act. um Sometimes I have to talk with somebody else. Like, what do you think about this? Sometimes I might need to dispute that, right? I might need to really write it out because I can tell I'm mind reading. I'm trying to tell the future, right? And I think as a human being, that's something that happens to everybody at some point or another. But if you have OCD, your OCD is going to try to attach to the threat, right? The threat, what it's perceiving as a threat. It may not be actually a threat, right? But if we can practice the deeper level of acceptance, if we can practice it, like, I really don't know everything, but like making a plan to recognize like what you can do or where your power is at in a given situation, we can take it step by step, because again, the OCD is going to want to pull you toward uh, solve it now urgently. You need to solve it, you need to stop it, you need, like, it needs to be shut down, you need to make all the decisions right now. Like, it'll have you be at step 100 and you're at step 3, right? And it's like, well, we can't deal with that now, we literally can't. And so that's part of the acceptance too, is like, I can't be at step 100. I know when I think about step 100, that feels scary, I don't like that, but all I can do is right here. This is like my bubble, right? But OCD already be playing stories about months ahead or weeks ahead. And it's like, dude, we don't know yet. We have to take it a step at a time. And that's really a huge part of recovery that deserves its own space and time for exploration. Learning to take steps. Because with OCD, we don't like, there's no such thing as like steps. It's like jumps, leaps, right? Like, yeah. And but again, that's also the perfectionism to procrastination pipeline that I want to talk about, where it's like, this high demand, this high sense of urgency, these high standards that we have for ourselves are not sustainable. And that's why we go from perfectionism to procrastination, because we get overwhelmed by um, all of the output, the demand, the pressure, right? The that like trucking on a sense of urgency all day long, or like believing that things need to be perfect and you need to get this stuff done. You're eventually, that's going to lead to somebody, for lack of a better word, burning out, right? Because you can't keep that up forever. So that's part of the recovery too, and that's part of taking the steps that I mentioned. So next time I want to talk more about perfectionism to procrastination. Avoidance is all part of that. As always, like, you can comment, you can email me, um you can message me on Instagram if you have an idea that you want me to talk about as far as OCD, anxiety, panic. Um Eventually I also want to talk about, when you start recovering and the layer underneath, right? But OCD and anxiety are the top layer. That's what I always say, right? When we start managing our OCD and anxiety better, and then we get more into like feeling our feelings, that needs its own version of acceptance, right? But the cool thing is that all the distress tolerance and all the skills that you've been building to manage your OCD and anxiety, you can use to manage anything, any emotion or difficulty. They're transferable skills, which is awesome. But it can be, there's work to do for a lot of us once we really start, managing the OCD and anxiety better. Um, Now the work kind of becomes like emotional regulation, right? Working on the relationships with others and ourselves. And so the recovery journey extends beyond just, managing symptoms. It really turns into like a journey of like thriving and self-discovery, which is so cool. Uh, so, anyways, I really hope that this information was helpful. Um, any feedback is helpful for me. I'll be back next week with another episode. And I hope y'all have a good day and keep trucking on your OCD recovery journeys.